It's good evening. It's wonderful to be with you all, with my West Coast Dharma friends, my online Dharma friends, my Dudnop Dharma friends. I mean, it's really wonderful. I did sit two 8-day retreats, thanks to the pandemic, with Empty Gate, and was able to sit 3 days this past retreat, although I actually just sat a week of winter kilche in person at Providence. And so I'm going to sit in a chair because my knee's kind of a little hurting right now. And I want to thank Zen Master Bon Soeng for inviting me to be part of this winter Dharma talk series. And so this is really a very special time of year for me, this 3-month period between early January and the beginning of April. So it's our time of kilche, which is a Korean word, which means tight or tight practice. And so this 3-month period of intensive practice, I've really made this a part of my life for the past 30 years. So as you may know, our kilche retreat continues a tradition dating back to the Buddha, when Buddhist monks would gather during the monsoon season for what was known as a rains retreat. And for 3 months during the rainy season in Asia, monks would gather together in their temples and monasteries and practice. And our school, the Quantum School of Zen, continues this tradition by hosting in-person 3-month retreats. It centers in the United States and Europe and also in Asia, which includes the Diamond Hill Zen Monastery, which is in Rhode Island, where I practice at the Providence Zen Center. But, it's really not so easy for a layperson to take 3 months off to practice in person at kilche. So I think it was in the early 90s, our school developed what we called heart kilche. So it's this 3-month period of time that parallels in-person kilche. And the people who practice heart kilche make a commitment to do additional practice at home during these 3 months. And I know from some of you online that you're participating in heart kilche this year. And so over the past 30 years, I've been practicing heart kilche every year. So there's kilche, which means tight practice, tight, from January to April. And then from April to the following January is what we call heije, which is looser practice. But for 30 years, I've been practicing heart kilche, and I wanted to talk about my present kilche practices and also how they've affected my life. But first, I want to talk a little bit about why I practice Zen. And as Zen Master Bon Soeng mentioned at the introduction, I'm a retired professor, which is what emeritus means. Retired, a professor emeritus. And so when I was at the university, I was with a group of faculty, and we decided to offer meditation sessions for students, for faculty and staff. And we'd offer them about once a week, and I offered mine twice a month. And we offered different forms of meditation. So there was a Vipassana practice, there was mindfulness practice, and I offered Zen. And so for any of you that have been on a college campus, you know that there are bulletin boards that are filled with loads of flyers. They have upcoming events, they have used books for sale, they have study tours, internships, summer jobs. And so I developed a flyer about my Zen practice, my Zen meditation sessions. But I wanted to include like a short explanation about what is Zen. And I found what I was looking for from our school Zen master, Zen Master Song Hong, Bobby Rhodes. And she wrote that Zen is being able to answer the next moment without any trace of the last. So that's what I put in my flyer. Zen is being able to answer the next moment with no trace of the last. And it's this moment-to-moment practice, this moment-to-moment attention, which helps us to be fully present in the unfolding of our lives and helps us to meet each moment without attachment to the past or to outcome. And this is what I would really consider living fully and engaged. And it's my Zen practice which allows me to meet each moment fully. Now, of course, this is the goal, and I don't always achieve it, but when it does happen, for me, it feels true and correct when I'm able to meet each moment fully. So in the early 90s, I began practicing Heart Kilche, and I added additional practices to my life, but they were fairly modest when I began. I was working full time. I was going to school for my PhD. My wife and I had 2 children, ages 5 and 7. So let's just say that life was really, really, really busy. Now, 30 years later, I'm retired, no longer in school. And the 2 kids are now 35 and 37, and they're married and they actually have their own kids. And now I participate on Heart Kilche online through the online Sangha, where I know some of you from. And we wouldn't even conceive of that in the early 90s. So this year, my formal practice commitments include 108 bows in the morning and 30 minutes of sitting. And then at night, I do 30 minutes of chanting and 10 minutes of sitting. And I also committed to sitting 2 weeks of Kilche at Providence in person and attending Kongan interviews weekly. Now, in addition to these commitments, over the past several years, I've actually committed myself to really surrendering myself to silence during these 3 times. Now, I'm traditionally an NPR junkie, and in Boston, we have 2 NPR radio stations. So I'm usually listening to the radio, and I'm usually listening to some NPR program, except during Kilche. So during Kilche, my radio is silent, and that includes when I'm driving. So no matter how long the drive is, during Kilche, I choose to drive in silence. And I've been doing this for at least 10 years, and it's really helped me to pay attention to what the moments offer. Not listening to the radio has meant not following the news closely for 3 months. And then I actually noticed during the past year that I'd begun following the news on my phone. So reluctantly, this past January, I decided to stop looking at the news on my phone and also to stop reading the daily news summary that I would receive from the New York Times. And this has really helped me to slow down and to pay attention to both my inner process and what's happening around me. And if this was any year that I needed clarity and space that the Kilche can offer me, it's been this past year. So at the end of March of 2020, right before the end of Kilche, after about 2 years of searching, my wife and I bought a 72-year-old house, which we've spent the past year renovating. Actually, during last year's 8-day Kilche, I actually left one sitting period so I could actually go to the open house for this house, which we then bought, because in this market, you have to be constantly available. So I actually left Kilche. I actually left the 8-day retreat so I could see the house. We then bought it. And then we spent the past year renovating this house. And then about a week after we signed the papers for the house, I made one of my daily calls to my mother, who was 96 and was living independently in an apartment building for seniors. But she didn't answer the phone. And when I went to her apartment, I found her in bed, and she was actually barely responsive. So I ended up calling 911, and that started a 3-month period which included 4 hospitalizations for her and 2 stays in rehab for congestive heart failure and other medical complications, which included breaking her hip from a fall, which happened when she was home during one of her in-between hospital stays. So as a clinical social worker, I was the family liaison for her medical treaters, in addition to her primary family caregiver. And so I spoke with doctors and nurses and social workers daily. I contacted her insurance companies. I brought my mother to medical appointments and coordinated her in-home caregivers. And then when she was discharged from rehab, the final time in July, I coordinated her treatment with the hospice team. And this is all going on while we were replacing the heating system for our house. We're finding live wires in the walls under insulation and other surprises that our new home had to offer us. And I have no doubt at all, that my Zen practice helped keep me steady and calm during a very difficult time in my life. And then, was as her wish, my mother passed away at home in October. Our temple rules state that in the great work of life and death, time will not wait for you. And my mother's death was a huge hit for me. And as my siblings and I viewed her body before the funeral, I wondered, where did my mother go? Her body's here, but where's she? A huge don't know. A huge don't know. You know, the Buddha spoke about old age, sickness, and death. And they have been my teachers over the past 6 months since my mother's passing. In addition, the teachings on impermanence and karma have guided me. In a sutra, in one of the Buddha sutras, these are four core teachings: old age, sickness, death, impermanence, and karma. And in this sutra, they're called the subjects of contemplation. The subjects of contemplation. A Theravada monk wrote that the Buddha advised us that these are 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a man or a woman, ordained or lay. These are 5 subjects of contemplation that should be reflected on daily. And so during this month's Kilche, I added reciting and reflecting on these 5 facts daily. And so as during my morning practice now, I reflect on these. And I chose the phrasing from Thich Nhat Hanh. So Thich Nhat Hanh wrote the phrasing here, and they're called the 5 remembrances. And these 5 remembrances are, I am of the nature to grow old. There's no way to escape growing old. I'm of the nature to be of ill health. There's no way to escape ill health. I'm of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. And the fifth remembrance, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. And so I recite these 5 remembrances daily before I sit, and then reflect. And it's been quite an interesting journey as I've reflected on these. It's been really layered. It's been like peeling an onion. And so when I first started reciting them as part of my morning practice, I was really struck by their bare honesty. It's what's attracted me to Zen. I mean, this just strictly, completely honest. And so as I grieve for my mother, the realization of impermanence and the passing of everyone and everyone I hold dear has really never become more real. But that was one layer. The next layer was quite a surprise to me when this irrational thought popped in my mind a couple weeks later, thinking, there got to be a workaround. There has to be some way. There has to be some way out of this. Now, I, of course, immediately realized the absurdity of that statement. But then I began to reflect on, where did it come from? Who says things like that? Okay, that's for everybody else, but not for me. So Zen Master Bon Soeng would say, don't make special. And this was me making special big time. I am special. These remembrances apply to everybody else, but not to me. But it was interesting for me to see the strength of my ego and what it will do to protect itself. But, it also reminded me of doctors who would tell their patients not to smoke, but then would continue to smoke themselves. Or parents who would tell their children, do what I say, not what I do. So this applies to you, but not to me. So that was an interesting layer to get through. After that, the next layer was reflecting on the truth of this present moment. To be fully aware, but not get caught really in the pain and suffering of the 5 remembrances, because they really hit for me pretty close to home. And the Buddha taught that the world is created by mind alone. And Zen Master Bon Soeng wrote in the Compass of Zen that in the teachings of the Maha Parinirvana Sutra, that all formations are impermanent. This is the law, he wrote, of appearing and disappearing. When both appearing and disappearing disappear, then this stillness is bliss. And for me, this has become a point of further reflection. And then that revealed then another layer. And more recently, I've begun reflecting on this Wadu question. Marshall spoke about at the beginning of our practice, giving instruction, that we really have a practice of inquiry, of investigation. So my Wadu question has become, what is this I? What is this I that is reciting the 5 remembrances? And Zen Master Bon Soeng would say that when there's no I, your mind is clear like space, which means a mind which is clear like a mirror. And the mirror reflects what is before it. And when the mirror is clear like space, just like Zen Master Soeng description of Zen that I use in my meditation flyers. We're able to meet each moment without a trace of the last. And just like a mirror doesn't hold an image, we're able to reflect on the truth of the present moment and then to act on what's needed in that moment. So I recently heard a Confucian saying, which also hit home for me. And it says, we all have two lives. The second one starts when you realize that you only have one. So the second one starts when you realize you only have one life. So for me, reflecting on the five remembrances has been a very clear reminder that I only have one life. And for the past 30 years, Kilche has been a time to slow down, to strengthen my practice, and to really meet the world with fresh eyes. And to know at the core of my being that my actions are really my only true belongings. And I can't escape the consequences of my actions. But my actions are the ground upon which I stand. So I want to thank you all for listening to my talk. And I also want to thank Zen Master Bon Soeng for his kind invitation to let me speak with you this evening. So thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your beautiful, layered, and full presentation of Dharma and our practice. I really appreciated the layers that you go through when you really reflect, and that you're sharing with us your process on working with those five remembrances. I'm sure it's not true for everyone, but for many of us, those basic points were the entry point to practice. For some, it's just a difficult moment in our lives. For many, it's just the overwhelming sense of reality, of loss and grief and impermanence and death, along with old age and sickness. You hit the big ones. In my mind, I often seem to pair up, I put in poverty along with those five reminders. The sense of, for many people, for many of us, the struggle just to keep up, the basic difficulty that there is in living our lives. My mind always hits on contradictions, and there was an important one that I heard Mark say, and I'm going to just say a little bit about this and maybe just name it and then open up for questions. But Mark defined Zen using Zen Master Soeng-Hyung's phrase of Zen is this moment what was the word, Mark? On what?
Without meaning each moment without a trace of the last.
Without a trace of the last moment. And then he talked about karma, which is essentially how the last moment begins and impacts the next moment. So in these contradictions, that is the Kangan right there. In this moment, which kind of squares the circle, if you will, there is no time, there is no space, there is no last moment, there is no future moment. There's just this moment. So maybe, as Mark was pointing us to, if we can be in the present moment, that's when our karma, if you will, disappears, because there is no past moment, there's just now. And are we awake and aware enough to perceive the moment that's happening inside and out, and to act appropriately in that moment. And that essentially is Zen. And it's interesting because Buddhism as a religion, and in many ways in Theravadan Buddhism, you're really being pointed towards doing good and not doing bad. There is something called the 3 precepts. I can't even remember them, but it's basically do good, don't do bad. And a lot of the sutras go into describing what is good, what is bad, what is right way of being, what is wrong. But Zen doesn't get so involved in the minutia of right and wrong. It says you find out in the very moment that you're alive, because what might have been right in the last moment might be completely wrong for this moment. And if we get too tethered to our ideology of good and bad and right and wrong, we miss the moment. And just lastly, just to reflect on the effort that Mark brings to this Kyolche time. And really, for him, it's taking the time out means the full 3 months. My experience, that's a pretty long time. Most Soto schools of Zen, they have practice periods that last 4 or 5 weeks. It's an easier time to contain. It takes a lot of work to stay present throughout a 3-month period. And, each of us can use this time in a different way. Over the years, I've often used the Kyolche time as the time to institute something new in my life. When I looked down at a scale one day and I realized how high it was, I thought, Kyolche is the perfect time to tackle this problem. And I did, and it worked for me. And I've had to do it a number of Kyolche times to recalibrate. And we can do that with anything. These days, there's a lot of talk about a dry January. It's the same point. It's using this time period to look at our lives, reflect on how things are going, and to take the risk of trying something new. Impermanence works in many different directions. Things we think we're stuck in, that it is just the way it is. We forget impermanence when we believe that. So I want to appreciate Mark one more time for offering us the optimism, really, of remembering that things are always changing. And right now, we can return to this moment.